let's continue our experiment here with the chime, okay? All right. So this time with the chime, what I'm going to invite you to do is count the number of breaths for 1 minute. I'm going to count the number of breaths, just normal breaths that you take. Breathing in, breathing out is 1. Breathing in, breathing out is 2. Okay? All right, so give it a try. We'll do it for 1 minute. Are you ready? Here we go. How many breaths? 7, 10, 10, 10, 14. Okay.
60.
60.
6.
This is what the science of breathology tells us. So over here is the parasympathetic nervous system. I'm going to get into that. Over here's sympathetic. Okay? Gas pedal, brake. So what's been shown is that when you train the breath into a 6 cycle per minute cadence, you balance the autonomic nervous system, which is what I'm going to talk about for the remainder of the time. And how mindfulness practice, meditation practice, combined with breathing is so efficacious and so healthy and so forth and so on. It turns out that in cases of severe stress, maybe generated by threat or fear, our breathing becomes very shallow, right? That too little cycle throws the system into incoherence from the other end. But it turns out that when we breathe around close to 6 cycles per second, we're balancing out the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system. So we can learn how to optimize ANS balance by learning how to breathe properly. So earlier today we did diaphragmatic breathing. Now I'd like to invite you to try it again for a minute. And this time, count. So either 5-5 or 4-6, however you want to do it. So it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what we get is 5 times 12 or 6 times 10, 10 counts, is 6 breaths. All right? So now you have a way to anchor the cadence, which if you choose to use this as a practice, as a discipline, to intentionally reset your autonomic nervous system, which you can then do once you practice it many times throughout the day, then this is one really good way to do it. So let's see how you do it. I'll do it with you, of course. And we'll do it for a full minute. Are you ready? Anybody come in right around there? 6? Yeah? So that's what it feels like, right? So once your muscle memory learns that, which takes a period of practice, more or less, then you can easily go into that state. And as teachers who are so busy, the best place to do that is on the toilet, right? So we all get toilet breaks at least. I mean, you do get that, right? No, seriously, I talk to elementary teachers and they say, we never get breaks. What's a break?
Well, you're in the bathroom. You're still talking, dude.
If instead of breathing naturally, you superimpose a slow, steady rate of respiration on the body, you modulate the whole cardiovascular system. Reciting the rosary or a yoga mantra enhanced heart rate variability by slowing the breath rate down to 6 beats, 6 breaths per minute. So it's not necessarily one thing over another at all. Silence helps the newly generated cells to differentiate into neurons and integrate into the system. Isn't that cool? Silence. Wow. Downtime. Overall similar genomic patterns changes occurred in practitioners of a specific mind-body technique, Qigong. This indicates a common state regardless of the techniques used to elicit. So it turns out that there are all these genomic changes that can be measured when people take on a meditative practice. A couple thousand. And they measure these things. How do they do that? Right? So there's Qigong. Marvelous, these slow movements. We did a little bit of it. Now, this mindfulness training in schools and teachers getting mindfulness training is really timely because we're seeing a lot of reports like this. Right? I think this is a British publication, yeah. Quarter of Northern Ireland school principals have unmanageable stress. So we're getting more and more reports of these very, very stressed out. And there are actually better ways of managing stress than this, right? Now, one of the issues... One of the things about it is that we have to re-educate ourselves about stress, right? The bottom line is that stress is necessary for life. Because stress is the way that we adapt to changing circumstances. Learning requires stress. And what's meant by that is that when we learn, we are going to have some of the same constituent brain chemicals that we have as when we're in fight or flight mode. So it's how much stress, what kind of stress, and how we learn to modulate it. The individual who put stress on the map in the 60s was an Austrian-born, trained immigrant to McGill University, Dr. Hans Selye, the most famous name in early stress studies. And he did a lot to put the whole notion of stress on the map with his General Adaptation Syndrome, or GAS. That has definitely withstood the test of time because he did lots and lots of studies showing how when you put animals into situations of stress which they cannot control, like electric shocks on their little feet and those kind of cruel things, that unfortunately still go on to a certain extent. There was this whole blossoming of understanding of what stress did and didn't do to the body. And he was very prolific. He continued for many, many years. Unfortunately, he was sorry he ever used the word stress. He said he should have used the word strain, because he outlined 4 different kinds of stress, not all of it bad. There's acute stress, and acute stress is what happens when the alarm goes off, that there's an abrupt change in the circumstance. It could be mildly disturbing to majorly threatening, and it gets our attention. But we should be able to come down to normal homeostatically without too much effort. Then there's understress. So there's an episode of too much stress or an episode of understress. Being bored, being isolated socially is very stressful. It's one of the factors implicated in stress reduction and the longevity studies. That the more socially connected we are, the lower our stress rate and the longer that we live. Makes sense because we're mammals. Yeah.
Those situations of being bored or isolated, on this, are they the under stress
Yes.
category?
Yes.
Okay. So even though under stress doesn't mean that you're not stressed, that you're stressed in a different kind of way, like you're.
Yeah, your stress is a result of your deprivation.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And this kind of stress leads to depression. This kind of stress, if it's too much, if it gets into the distress area, can lead to all kinds of complications. So when we say stress, the children say, I'm so stressed out or whatever, usually this is what we're talking about. What we're really talking about is we haven't managed the incidence of acute stress well enough, and we start to carry it over. Many of the assaults of everyday living trigger bits of stress arousal, so that over time we experience chronically high levels of fight or flight. This causes strain and distress. Health suffers, body resistance declines, our ability to attend productively declines. So think of it most simply as carryover stress. These are various episodes of acute stress which we do not integrate, we do not assimilate, and we carry them over so that they accumulate in the system. And that's what leads us to stress-related illnesses, which is currently the cause of about 80% of the Western world's diseases and death, right? So that's really what we're talking about. But you also mentioned a fourth kind of stress, and that is eustress, as in euphoric stress. Or what could also be caused positive stress, or more popularly today, pro-stress. And we're beginning to find these articles about people whose level of pro-stress is so high that they don't get sick, they can maintain these high levels of activity, and so forth. And mostly that's mindset. That's mindset. It's how we interpret the events. One person will interpret an event this way, the other one will interpret it that way. For one, it was stressful, threatening, frightening. This one was really engaging and interesting and stimulated curiosity, and so it goes. Adopting the right attitude can convert a negative stress into a positive one. Right? So often, the things that we think are negative at the time turn out to be neutral and positive. And it's one of the skills that resilient people develop, is they can look at an episode or an experience in their life that seemed overwhelming at the time, and re-looking at it maybe a bit later, and it's like, wow, I really learned something out of that. I won't do that again. So it becomes a gift. And that's part of the innate response that we should all have to learning life's lessons. And now we're getting these kinds of articles. They're fun to read, and they're encouraging to read. Turn up the stress. It's making us look at the whole thing different. This is an article that came out. There's a lot of them. You can find a lot of them very easily. This article came out talking about high performers. They don't get sick, they don't feel exhausted. And it usually has to do with a lot of social support. There's a strong component of meaning, that my life is so meaningful. I'm so excited to get up every day and do the things that really are meaningful to me. The immune system gets bolstered by that, right? I've got this strong sense of I'm contributing to life, right? It's those kinds of lived values. People with a strong sense of being in a field where they are in the service of some higher ideal of power. They have this stress, but it doesn't seem to affect them the same way it would affect another person. So the variables seem to be, going back to the early studies in the 60s, of psychological hardiness in adults. It's adults who embrace change. Because change is so ubiquitous. There are a couple of major strategies towards change. I'd be freaked out, there's too much change going on, I can't deal with it, I can't cope. Or, wow, change, here's an opportunity to learn something, right? So that there seems to be that dichotomy, that polar thing that's going on. A second element is control. How much control do I feel like I have in this situation? People with a high sense that they can control things, certain things, and devote their energy to it, are much less likely to feel stressed out by it, right? But the real trick is to know what to let go of. I'm not going to try to control this stuff over here because I can't. I will control this. It's what Stephen Covey called the circle of concern, which is huge for most of us, versus our circle of influence, which is always smaller than our concern, but is where we generate and produce a positive effect on ourselves and others, right? So as I go back to America and face Trump USA, and all of the things that seems to be harbinger of, I have to keep reminding myself to stay in my circle of influence and not be out in my circle of concern. And the third C is challenge. So change, control, and challenge. People who enjoy challenges, taking on the challenges that the changes bring, maintain a high level of stress hardiness. Okay, that's you, stress.
I have two questions.
Sure.
So, what is the definition then of stress? Because when we had the four, we had the acute stress, the understress, the eustress, and the distress. So, what is just the core definition
A
of
core
stress?
definition usually looks something like any change in the environment that requires an adaptive response.
Okay.
Any change. Any change is enough to get our attention, to get the brain's attention. And whenever the brain gets its attention drawn towards it, it starts producing excitatory neurotransmitters, the same ones that can eventually cause us to stress out. Moreover, if that change requires an adaptive response, which means we need to change our behavioral repertoire, we're either going to feel out of control, overwhelmed, etc., and that really ramps up our stress level. So in the face of a change which requires some sort of adaptive response, that's the moment of choice. Will I embrace this? Will I try to run and hide from it? Will I curl up in a ball and wish it didn't exist? There are many, many inflection points, even in a given day. And the more awareness we bring to a situation, the more we can very quickly reframe our experience and move in the direction of things like consideration, kindness, love, generosity, therefore evoking more wisdom and more skillful means to encounter the situation. So it gets right back to the heart stuff. At least that's one way of looking at it, I suppose. All right, so the autonomic nervous system, if you haven't had this for a while, it's got these three branches. We're going to ignore the enteric nervous system branch of it and just focus on these two. And then I'll tie that into an understanding of what stress looks like from the point of view of the body and the autonomic nervous system, and how that ties into mindfulness practice. The job of the two branches is to control the functions of virtually every organ and physiological system of the body. That's why intervening directly into the autonomic nervous system has so many health benefits. And breathing is the easiest way to do that. So breathing is this little window that we have to gain this beneficial control over all our organ systems. That, and changing our heart set, our mindset, moving towards gratitude and appreciation. I'm so grateful that this overwhelming change is happening in the world, right? It's oftentimes we have to talk to ourselves differently. I'm so grateful that I'm going back to a country that's in complete chaos. And it looks so dark right now because maybe I can be a part of a positive change, right? So think of it in these terms. You've got a gas pedal, you've got a brake. One, in a very simplistic way, is fight, flight, or freeze. Fight or flight. The other, rest and digest. All right? So just a couple of loosely configured handles. Equally as important in our understanding of it is that one evokes high brainwave frequencies, the other one evokes low brainwave frequencies. Now, when we live our life too much in high brain frequency, we start to really do a number on it. High frequency electrical activity in the brain can destabilize the entire mind-body system and contribute to a host of problems, from apprehension to worry, emotional reactivity, impulsivity, and impatience. This, by the way, is a really excellent book. Lou Fermi is one of the grandfathers of neurofeedback in the world. And he collaborated with this journalist to write this really great book on Fermi's work as a researcher, a theoretician, and a clinician who, using his very simple mindfulness techniques, has helped people overcome a lot of debilitating diseases. So it's very interesting. As a result of that book, I downloaded a lot of his MP3 tapes. They're really cool. So again, remember, we're talking about this high speed electrical activity, which is constantly drawing down our supply of those catecholamine levels. And if we don't regroup and have some downtime, we're entirely problems. All right, so again, the key to understanding this balance is that one system expends energy, the other one restores it. And we can't go all day, day after day, month after year, expending energy and expecting to maintain some semblance of good health and good cheer. So, to use an example of homeostasis, there are many systems in the human body which are homeostatic. You know, if I started running around the room, I'd get my heart rate up, I'd get my respiration rate up, I'd start to perspire to cool myself down, and as soon as I stopped, everything would start to slow down and come back down to normal. Bravo. Homeostatic mechanisms. So, many systems of the body rely on ultradian rhythms. Now, ultradian rhythms are designed at increments of 90 to 120 minutes. There's some flexibility to them, of course. But there's a period to expend, a period to restore, and so forth and so on. These ultradian rhythms, of which there are many, oh, this is what I was looking for earlier. This will be in your handouts. There's a lot of them. The brain changes hemispheric dominance on an ultradian rhythm. And it goes in concert with the nasal breathing. One passage of the nose is more open than the other. And this goes back to the art of pranayama yoga, right? Yeah. So in yoga, oftentimes you learn these circular breathing techniques. Breathe in here, out here. Breathe in here, out here. And what it does is it harmonizes and synchronizes the brain, right? Thousands of years old. That's because the brain has a natural rhythm from right to left and left to right. And then we're in a trance. It's that brilliant moment when both sides of the brain are balanced. That's when you get our good ideas. That's when you get our creative solutions. Right during that time. It's uncanny. Ultradian rhythms are coordinators of information between the expression of genes and environmental signals in the general process of adaptive homeostasis. Now, what does that mean? It means that if you put a system under enough pressure, it will readapt to those pressures, but it may adapt to them maladaptively. Okay? Now, what happens if you get this out of balance, right? Keeping in mind that no stress, no life, we could say, remember, we want a proper understanding of stress. It's not all bad. We can now change this to stress and recovery, right? But to further understanding, we have to explore, well, what happens if we're under too much stress for too long of a period of time with a reduced ability to recover from this ongoing stress? Well, we acquire a new normal. We have adapted maladaptively, right? So we're following the principle of homeostasis. The body tries real hard to adapt to this. Pretty soon we have this new set point, and actually it's kind of addictive, right? We're getting so much done. We're multitasking. We're checking off our checklists. You know, We're doing all kinds of things. We're raising kids, we're raising hell, we're doing our job at school, we're socializing, we're doing all these things we want to do, and then, oh man, am I tired? Am I ever going to recover? Right? Go on vacation and come back from vacation after 2 weeks, tired than I was when I went on my vacation, because I couldn't really slow my system down. That's not uncommon. All right, so that's called an allostatic load, or allostasis. This is the point at which catecholamine depletion starts really having an effect on us, because we're trying to get those catecholamines up. And what's better than caffeine, sugar, coffee, to give us that artificial boost that we're so desperate to have, because this is normal, right? And we are carrying such an allostatic load that the systems can start to go kaput. So what do? Well, we have to develop a new practice. We want to reset this whole thing, right? We want things to start coming back down, hopefully, to a more normal form of existence. And believe it or not, one of the central keys to that is how much time we spend with outer versus inner focus. When we're outer focused, as you are right now, you're using the sympathetic nervous system to be able to pay attention. If we're doing that all day long and we never turn inside, we maintain that high maladaptive adaptation. And it catches up with us over time. Somehow we have to develop the ability to live half of our life with an internal focus. And so a lot of meditative practices are designed to cultivate that inner look. It's that third eye business. Is that while we're living life, we need to be able to look inside ourselves. And the best way to do that is to monitor our physiological state, right? So I'm going through my day, I have a 15-minute walk here where I don't think I'm going to be interrupted, going from one thing to the next, right? And what I can do is I can take that walk mindfully, just paying attention to the weight of gravity where my foot meets the ground. So I can focus on something in my body, right? I can readjust my posture and just feel a difference in my posture as I walk. So I'm inside while I'm outside, right? I can close my eyes for a minute because I have some peace and quiet, right? I can close the door of my office just for 2 minutes, right? And I can go inside. Somehow we lose that ability to do that, and we don't always understand its importance. 2 hours of silence per day prompted cell development in the hippocampus, the region of the brain related to the formation of memory and involving senses. This was deeply puzzling. The total absence of input was having a more pronounced effect than any type of input tested. They found this out when they were using different forms of music to try to prompt brain cell regeneration. And they started playing around with periods of silence. Well, who's going to do it for 2 hours? Not me. I'm not. I mean, I have gone on a lot of silent retreats where I'm totally silent for a week. I once did it for a month. And it's cool. I like that sort of thing, right? I mean, I was so completely regenerated doing these periods of intense meditation practice. I don't know, for me it worked. Not everybody it works for, but I came to it out of martial arts. You know, our Japanese teacher said, "You're going to a Zen retreat." Are you kidding me? I'm going to do what? How many hours a day? Anyway, I found out that I really liked it, right? I just fell right into it.
Was it a special diet as well?
Well, it was really good food. It was not at a Zen center. I did it at a Zen center. The last one I did was about a month at a Zen center in Colorado. And they ate oryoki style. I don't know if any of you ever heard of that. Oh my God. Japanese are really big on rituals. And there's this whole ritual you do for every meal where everything has to be done perfectly and done in sequence while you're chanting, so you have to memorize all chants. And the chants aren't always, they're not always in English either. So I'm thinking, oh my God, what have I gotten myself into here? So I'm up late at night trying to memorize these chants, and I'm sneaking my food bowl out of the Zendo so I can practice at night so I don't feel like such an idiot, right? It took me 7 days of anxiety to learn the rhythm so I could enjoy my meals. It was way more than I bargained for. But, you know, it's just all mind stuff. And we started sitting at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, and would end about 9:30 at night. And I don't know, I just kind of like that kind of stuff. I just think I like it when it ends. It's kind of crazy. But, you know, I later thanked my Aikido teacher. Thanks a lot. Something like that. Silence helps the new generated cells to differentiate into neurons and integrate into the system. That's interesting. Yeah.
What silence means, is that silence from speaking? Is that silence from things going into your
As much as
ears?
possible, yeah. As much as possible.
Like when you're walking out
Yeah,
in nature, that is considered silence, I'm presuming?
Well, it is. It's more about the internal silence, though. Because with practice, one is able to, and you know, I can only do this as well as the average person. I'm just aware that I have a choice to either practice it or not. And that is even in a noisy situation, to practice just observing the passage of the reactions and thoughts to it.
So it's less listening.
Well, it's an
Trying to
inner
listen
listening.
more
It's
like-
an inner listening. It's more like here I am in the world, and what I'm really going to pay attention to is my inner reactions to the outer world, right? And that's really what the practice is. It's realizing that thoughts are only thoughts, and that's a really valuable practice. Like I don't have to be led by my nose, by all my thoughts, right? I don't have to believe everything I think. Well, that's one aspect of mindfulness training, is to understand and internalize the idea that when I'm always believing what my thoughts are telling me, I'm always sort of edgy, right? There's a way to live peacefully. And one way to live peacefully is understand that the mind generates thoughts endlessly. It never stops. Enlightenment doesn't mean that we stop thinking. It's idiotic to even entertain that suggestion. The only way that you can end thought and thinking is to put an end to the mind. And that's not a pleasant experience, I hear. It's called death. I don't know. Yeah, so there's many ways of looking at the whole business of mindfulness. And I'm just learning about this stuff myself, even though I've been doing it for 40 years. I always feel like such a beginner. But here's the important thing. Meditation alters brain structure in 8 weeks in brain regions associated with memory, sense of self, empathy, and stress. Now, comparing experienced meditators to novices, Herbert Benson and colleagues found that 2,209 genes were expressed differently, that is, switched on and off into 2 groups. Now, it's amazing they can do that. You know, they can look into the genome. Among them, genes involved in the immune system, inflammation, premature aging, oxidative decay, implicated in heart disease and cancer. After just 8 weeks of stress management training, hundreds of genes in novice meditators moved away from the stressed out pattern and instead resembled those associated with health. And then again, overall similar genomic patterns of change showed up in Qigong, right? We're seeing the same thing in people who pray. Now, when I was a high school teacher back in the mid-70s, I got a hold of this book, which surprised the hell out of the author, Herbert Benson, who was in charge of the newly established medical arm of Harvard Medical School, to try to come up with some other way that they could help patients who were no longer being helped by the standard application of allopathic medicines, armamentum, which is drugs, surgery, radiation, you know, things which have their place. I have no argument against them if I needed them, but because not everybody responds successfully to these, they wanted to establish some other possible protocol. So they charged Benson and a team with conducting interviews and experiments as scientific as possible on people who made claims that meditation could alter the autonomic nervous system's operation. So they did. They actually took a team off to Dharamsala, India, early in the 70s, and started monitoring Tibetan monks and finding the most amazing results when they got back to their lab and started looking at these EKGs and EEGs, and they were looking at changes in body temperature and all these amazing things, because these monks could do these extraordinary feats. For example, one of the things they actually filmed while recording all these physiological measures on these monks was these monks in the middle of winter would go into these huts in the Himalayan foothills, and they'd strip down to loincloths, and they'd be wrapped in wet sheets in the middle of winter, right? And now what they had to do to pass their final exam was to dry the sheets out by raising their body temperature enough. And they did it. They did it. They'd sit there, and they were saying that they had to keep wiping off the lens of their cameras because they were getting all steamed up in these huts and stuff like that. Like, now how can you do that? How can you raise your body temperature like that? All the laws of Western science up until then said you cannot do that. You cannot change the autonomic nervous system functions. But you can in many ways.
I've seen that movie. I think one guy had a different temperature on the inside of his apartment and different on the outside.
Yeah.
Some other guy actually stopped his heartbeat on its own.
That one I haven't heard about. Were these the monks?
Yeah.
These are the monks.
He basically just consciously
Yeah.
stopped his heartbeat.
Wow.
And then he restarted it.
And then he restarted it. Well, you know, there's a lot of these anecdotal studies. Some of the first Westerners to go into Tibet. What was the woman's name? She was one of the first ones there. Alexandra, she was British. Neil, she's got one other name. And that was, gosh, early in the 20th century. And she went there and she was recording these things that these monks were doing. And of course, nobody would believe her. So anyway, these folks went and they brought all this stuff back. And then they started setting up these protocols in the lab, and they said, okay, look, we need to desacralize these things. We need to make it secular. We need to remove it from its religious trappings, because we're going to turn a lot of people off otherwise. And we need to just do science here. So they came up with what they called the relaxation response. It's 1975. I read it when it came out. Surprised the hell out of Benson. It became a national bestseller. It's got millions and millions of issues. It's been translated into 49 languages. And since then, he's written at least a dozen other books. And he's still teaching. And his work is getting more and more out there. You think the heart math stuff is out there? His stuff is really getting out there with things they're finding they can accomplish with simple techniques like the relaxation response. So here it is. I call it the 4 Ps. They don't necessarily call it that, but I like to make these things more easy to grasp. All right. The first P is place. If you're going to learn the relaxation response, which has myriad benefits, it's important to find a place where you can successfully practice this one day after the next for at least 30 days. And that's their benchmark for beginning to measure some of the changes that are taking place in the body. It needs to be a quiet place, and they recommend 10 to 20 minutes once or twice a day. Less than 10 minutes doesn't seem to have the effect that we would want it to have. More than 20 doesn't necessarily add to the benefits of it. All right, 10 to 20 minutes, once or twice a day for 30 days. It takes 30 days for a new neuron to wire in. That's probably why they say 30 days. A lot of the measures are 60 days. The second one is posture. It's not necessary to have a fancy yogic posture. It's not necessary to sit in legs crossed, any of that. What's necessary is just to sit up and not lie down. The problem with lying down is, yeah, we're probably going to fall asleep, because most of us are a bit sleep deprived all the time, right? Well, if you fall asleep, you're in delta, and you're not getting the benefits of being awake to generate these new neural connections as you would be in a theta state, which is why those hypnagogic and hypnopompic states are so important for facilitating movement towards one's most important goals. Because we're actually reprogramming the brain to think and perceive differently. All right, so don't lie down, just sit up, right? That's the rule. The third one is they found that after 10 years of investigations, the 10 years in which Benson himself would not practice what they were teaching because he didn't want to bias his results. After 10 years, he wrote a book and said, the results we're seeing in people's return to health and this and that and the other thing are so profound that I would be a fool not to do this. And they also found after 10 years that there was one group that got the maximum benefits, and they distinguished themselves. Eventually they realized that these were people who used that quiet time for prayer. So what they recommended as a result of that, again, they didn't want to sacralize this and turn people off, is they said, we need a secular version of it. So they said, pick a point of focus that matches your deepest values, goals, and aspirations in life. Pick a word or a phrase that exemplifies that. Om, peace, namaste, the Lord is my shepherd. It doesn't matter what it is, it just has to be a reflection of your deepest aspirations as a human being. Focus on that as an affirmation on the out-breath. That's the parasympathetic nervous system, the out-breath. And then lastly, because the mind always does what the mind does, and why this is always referred to as a practice, is that the mind is going to constantly generate thoughts. It is not going to stop because we got better at meditating. And that's the most discouraging thing for people when they begin this and they try it out. It's, oh my God, I sit down and my mind gets even busier. Who wants that? It's driving me crazy. Oy, right? But we just have to realize that over time that's going to settle out, because we begin to realize that thoughts are just thoughts. And when we get that distance between them, we're a lot healthier mentally and emotionally as a result of it. So what they say is, look, you're going to sit down, you're going to start to meditate, and your mind is going to take you somewhere, and your 10 minutes is going to be over, and you're over here somewhere in your mind, and you're going to go, oh man, what a waste this is. Wow, I'm so bad at this. And they said, no, don't do it that way. As soon as you find yourself having drifted, just say, oh well, and go back to your word phrase. Just say, oh well, right? So you need that sort of non-judgmental stance. And the fourth one is to remain passive to the endless cycle of thoughts. And recognize that the mind does what the mind does. And you're not going to stop it. The most advanced meditator in the world is not going to stop it. Not as long as we have a mind, because that's what the mind's job is. Constantly generate thoughts. But that's very stressful over time. Then they have, if you read this stuff, they have all kinds of benefits that have come about as a result of this. Lots of benefits. And the benefits just keep aggregating and keep on accumulating as time goes on. But we have a whole menu of things that we can do to evoke the same responses. So, we're just about out of time. Let's just do a short relaxation response together, okay? And that'll be a nice way to sort of wind us down and transition from this wonderful day together. Is it time to go yet?
You're not going to yell at
I promise I won't make you go. Okay, so I'll ring this. Now, keep those things in mind. Not a bad idea, right? So, posture, just sit comfortably. You know, it's nothing to do. Point of focus, right? What are you going to focus on? What's going to be your keyword here? And then passive. So on the out breath, you say that word or phrase, right? It's an anchoring technique. You're anchoring it to your breath. And then within a fraction of a second to about 10 seconds, you will notice that you have gone somewhere in your mind. And then you say, oh well, and you just come back, okay? We're not going to do it for very long, just a couple minutes. I really enjoyed myself today. Thank you so much for coming, taking a Saturday to go through this together. It was nice. It's really nice being here with you. Thank you again for the invitation. And Liliana, thank you so much for organizing all this great endless emails.
Thank you so
about you.
much for coming. We have a little gift for you.
Oh, I love gifts.
ISK bag, and inside you put ISK mug.
A mug?
Yes, special. You can drink
More
water.
original.
Yay!
So thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I hope we invite you back for 5 days.
Can I come back? Oh, I'd love to come back and do more. This is, to me, I always look at this as a beginning. Perhaps if I do manage to come back, we can think about a half-day workshop for parents. I've done that in schools where I've returned to, and parents really like that sort of Saturday up till about noon, because I can really kind of lay things out. And yeah, so we'll just keep that in mind. For those of you who would like to be in contact, I have some cards here. And also I have some flyers. I don't know if you have colleagues in other schools who might be interested in my work. But I have, this sort of describes what I do a little bit. My website describes it. So let me put out a couple of these in case you're interested. Good, so have a good evening. Thank you all once again.